What's good, everybody? It's your boy, the real AG, back at you on the Lockdown Defense Sports Network. As y'all already know, the offseason is in full swing. First wave of free agencies happened. Draft is quickly approaching each and every day. It's that time of year where we review what teams have done, break it down across the league and talk about what work still needs to be completed for these teams to have competent rosters in 2026. If you've been keeping up with the coverage thus far, you know we are in the AFC conference this week. We did the East on Tuesday. My man RG did the North yesterday. Now it's time to go down to the dirty South. That's right, the AFC South, talking about the Colts, the Jags, the Texans, the Titans, the moves they've made thus far, the biggest roster holes they still have, and who might be ideal fits, just looking at what's left in free agency and the draft that's quickly approaching. So as I said, there's the teams. What do they need to do the most right now after this initial wave of free agency? And in this video, we're going to break down the free agency acquisitions, trades that have been made. There have been some. It's been a pretty vibrant offseason so far, as well as, the key departures for these teams. We're going to look at, what's the remaining top three positions of need for each roster here in the AFC South. And then, to wrap things up, put a nice little bow on it, if you will, we're going to look at what I think are ideal or realistic free agency additions that can be made, or draft picks that can be made with where these teams are at in the draft, that would answer or fulfill those positions of needs that still remain. So let's get right into it, ladies and gentlemen. We're starting off with the Houston Texans, the AFC South champ, the playoff perennial AFC South representative in the playoff here recently, a very elite defense, an up-and-coming coach, and a team that just seems to be right on the cusp of really doing some damage, I think, in the AFC. Really, if their quarterback can figure things out a little bit and they can help protect them a little bit more, I think the Houston Texans are a very dangerous team. But we'll see how things play out ultimately next year. But just looking at what they've done thus far, they've been a very proactive team this offseason. As you see, the acquisitions or additions, they traded for David Montgomery, what was basically a fifth-round value for those of you out there that saw that reporting. They extended Danielle Hunter. They re-signed Ed Ingram, their promising guard. They signed probably the biggest free agent tackle out on the board with Braden Smith. They re-signed Sheldon Rankins, who, despite his age, continues to produce for them. They signed Reed Blankenship. They signed Logan Hall, extended Dalton Schultz, re-signed Trent Brown, extended their kicker Kaimi Fairbairn, signed Foster Moreau, and signed the punter, but who really cares about the punter? Key departures, if you will, they traded Titus Howard, a staple offensive lineman for them for some time, released Joe Mixon, but I think everyone saw that one coming. They lost Juice Scruggs in that trade. That was basically fifth-round value for David Montgomery. And they, lost Christian Kirk, who came over for 1 year, but they lost him in free agency, signed with the Niners. On top of that, they have a lot of their depth pieces from these last few seasons on the defensive side of the ball, mainly along the defensive line, that are still, remaining free agents right now. But overall, I feel like it was a very solid free agency or initial wave of free agency for the Texans. They added reliable veteran depth, to the offensive line with Braden Smith, and Evan Brown, as well as, Wyatt Teller, who I forgot to mention, but that was a pretty recent acquisition that they made, signing him. I think also improved an already stout defense and secondary with the addition of Reed Blankenship and Logan Hall. So, really just added to what was already a promising and up-and-coming roster. Big, I think we've talked about it on the show, but really all this goes as far as CJ Stroud will take them. So with that, what are the remaining needs? And I think a lot of them are areas to build around CJ Stroud or support him better. I think the biggest need still is interior offensive line. To me, this is, priority number one after last year. I mean, that just mainly it has to be improving the trenches. I think we've seen that they understand that by some of the moves they've made, but they're aging moves. So it's like, a flex seal fix, if you will. It might alleviate the problem for 2026, but does nothing for 2027 and beyond. Um, but with that being said, the free agencies that they signed, the work is not done. I mean, Evan Ingram's you're in starting in the right tackle or right guard. I think Wyatt Teller is probably the likely left guard, but I think they could just look to add depth and an influx of youth to the offensive line room. I think their second biggest need is D tackle, just to add a more run stuffing type interior D lineman to pair with that aging group that, like I said, is still dominant but aging. And then I think running back is kind of an unspoken or under the radar need, I should say, for them. I mean, obviously they traded for David Montgomery. They expect to get stuff, get production out of David Montgomery, but I think they could, still look to add a more explosive or big play potential type running back to the room. Like I said, I mean, they invested a lot in Montgomery, but you just look at who they have with him and Woody Marks. I mean, those are two of the same type of back, just those more, between the tackle bruiser types. So I think to look to add, a guy with some speed or that big play potential and a receiving weapon out of the backfield wouldn't hurt to help, build around CJ Stroud. But just looking at the draft that's coming up here pretty soon, I mean, the Texans have 4 picks in the first 3 rounds, and I expect a majority of those to be O-line and D-line type players, with maybe a running back sprinkled in there. And we'll get to that right here in the next part of the review for the Texans and what is the ideal free agent or draft picks. I think, at this point, just looking at the money that's been spent in Houston and the remaining free agents, they're done in terms of, major acquisitions in the free agency pool. So I channeled, the best ideal additions to answer these needs in the draft. And that's with these 3 players right here. I just noting like potential free agents I think the Texans could add. In terms of the needs, I think they could look at a guy like Brian Robinson Jr. to pair in that running back room, but he's also, I mean, that's because he's the best youngest guy out there. But I think that's still kind of adding the same type of back, so it doesn't really fulfill the need. They could look at adding a linebacker to get some depth there. With a guy like Matt Milano, but again, that's a flex seal fix, if you will. It might help for 2026, but does nothing for the future. And I think that's where the Texans are. They need to start planning for the future and getting priced out of some of these players. So, number one draft wise, like I said, they got 4 picks in the first 3 rounds. They got pick 28, 2 second-round picks, and a third across, the first 2 days. I think at pick 28, you look at a guy like Caden Proctor, the offensive tackle / offensive guard out of Alabama. I mean, he could be, I think, a guy that is the long-term answer for them and brings that versatility out of the gate. Could develop a little bit more behind these veterans, not press to play immediately, not ruin his confidence. You have a guy that could play both tackle and guard if one of those older guys goes down. And then, ultimately a guy that turns into your tackle or guard of the future. And just looking at, Proctor himself, he's relatively young. He has a massive, an absolute unit for an offensive lineman. He has that, Trent Wirfs type athleticism and strength. And, I think all of that with the right teachings and right opportunity could really blossom into something special. So Caden Proctor at pick 28 is a guy I'd look at for them. Into the second round, to look at a guy like Caden McDonald, the D tackle out of Ohio State. He's definitely, I'd say, an NFL-ready run stopper with a very minor pass rush upside right now. But the run stopper is what they need now. I think McDonald's still very much developing as a pass rush talent and threat. And what perfect system to put him in to learn and actually develop that than with Houston. But I think from a run stop perspective, he is a plug and play on early down player right now. And, that immediately helps him in a big area of need for this defense. And again, like Proctor, a guy that, could develop behind the vets and eventually blossom into an all-around interior D-line threat. So that's a guy I look at them in the second round, or maybe even the third, depending on kind of how things fall. You never know with the draft. Then kind of my fun one here, we got Jadarian Price, the Robin to Jeremiah Love's Batman at Notre Dame, but and tested insanely well at the combine. Brings that big play threat with a 4.4 speed, and kind of has that allure of, like I said, being the Robin to Love and not having a lot of tread on the tires, and could be something very, very promising when given the opportunity. Look at like a Felix Jones situation, right? Like behind Darren McFadden at college, and then gets a chance with Dallas and had some pretty decent years. I mean, albeit not for very long, but you just never know when a guy gets a chance. And I think Jadarian Price is a guy that Houston could look at to, bring that different flavor, and get them the Sonic to the Knuckles if they want to continue that trend. But that is the Houston Texans review. Remaining needs and ideal free agency are draft fits for the Texans. Moving on to the next team in the South, we got the Colts. It started real hot in 2025, real hot, went all in, and boy, did that blow up in their face. But they I think have made some promising and aggressive moves to stay in that quote win now window. But the work is not done in Indy, and I think they understand that. And we'll kind of talk about it. But first, looking at the additions and retentions for the Colts. You look at, they re-signed Alec Pierce, re-signed Daniel Jones, paid a lot of money to re-sign those guys, signed Arden Key, signed Michael Clemens, traded for Kobe Wooden, signed Jonathan Owens, and then, key releases are departures. Obviously traded Michael Pittman, traded Zaire Franklin, lost Nick Cross in free agency, lost Kiwit Pay to the Raiders, and Samson Ebukim, the other edge rusher. They lost him in free agency. So, have to replenish the defense still a little bit. But overall, I think just the first wave, they were mildly successful in, addressing their needs. I think it was evident that their biggest goal was to retain the biggest free agents in Pearson, Indiana Jones. But, that came at a big price because obviously they had to trade Pittman and Franklin, for cap reasons and to, basically open up room for the checks they wrote for those two guys. And I think those big signings in turn kind of hamstrung them a bit, on their edge rushing needs and who they could go after. But that being said, they were reportedly in and very favored to sign Trey Hendrickson, but for the Max Crosby Baltimore debacle that occurred, just last week. But, that's the Colts retentions and additions. Now getting into what I think is still left or the work that needs to be done, the biggest areas of need for them. I think number one is obviously edge rusher. The additions they've made so far versus the guys they lost. I mean, they just added rotational type players to very glaring needs for starting and quality edge rushers on the roster. I mean, right now, their 2024 first round pick, Latu, is their most proven edge rusher, which is not great to say. And like I said, they were in on Hendrickson, so I think they are not done in terms of bringing in a veteran edge rushing presence, but the options are drying up as we speak and as I'm even recording this video. I think the second biggest need for the Colts is linebacker. Like I said, they traded Franklin. Their other linebacker, Jermaine Pratt, is still a pending free agent. So really they need two starting caliber linebackers right now to shore up the middle of that defense. And then I think safety is still kind of an under the radar need for them. Like, yeah, they signed Jonathan Owens and, another rotational type guy, but they did lose Nick Cross and Rodney Thomas to free agency. Cross, played 1,100 snaps over the last season. So they're losing a guy that, played a lot of meaningful football for them. And I don't know that the two additions they brought in, who, undoubtedly right now are poised to compete for that spot, are really going to take over and fulfill the same role that Cross did. So, looking at their needs, what I think are the ideal free agent or draft moves that they can make? Like I said, I think that they're not done with adding an edge rusher and specifically in free agency. And I think just given the draft approach that they can take, because remember, they do not have a first round pick. They got Sauce Gardner due to that. And so their first pick is not until pick number 47 in the second round. They're going to have to still be a little active in free agency. But I think, need to clear up some cap space to ultimately do that. But looking at what I think the best free agent move they can make is signing Joey Bosa. Or, a little caveat, I'll even say Hassan Reddick. Either guy, gives you the same thing they need, and that's just a cheaper, veteran presence that could still produce from an edge rushing spot in the defense in Lou Amaruno's defense. Someone that a guy that made Trey Hendrickson who he is with all the sacks. So I think if you got a guy that had veteran savviness to edge rushing, they can do some damage with him. That Joey Bosa, albeit has his health concerns, could fit that role in a limited capacity. Our Hassan Reddick, who's just a little bit younger and a little less health concerned, but may not all be up there with just the issues he's had with teams, I guess. But either one, that gives them that cheap veteran presence, and then I think they, would still need to add in the draft. But just given where they're at in the draft, I don't think they're going to add a person that can contribute right away, with where their picks are at. So, moving to the draft, I think the number one guy they should target is Anthony Hill Jr. That's the linebacker out of Texas. He is just a downright high upside selection in round 2 that I think could just solidify the middle of the defense and, get their heir to Zaire, if you will. See what I did there? But, Anthony Hill Jr. himself is getting comps to Bobby Wagner. Long time successful NFL linebacker, hell of a guy to get compared to, coming out of the draft. He is a bona fide 3-down linebacker that can make an impact in every phase of the defense. I think you watch his film, you see the consistency that he brings, the field command that he has, and just his athleticism, just makes him, I think, the surefire, safest linebacker pick in this draft. And so to fulfill that need, and with where the Colts are at, that's the guy they should be targeting with their first pick. And then, to round it out, I think, getting someone like Taylor Rapp in free agency, not a superstar by any means or a household name, but, a guy that has played some very quality football through his time in the league with both the Rams and the Bills. A solid contributor in both coverage and run defense. And, at 28 years old, I don't think is really showing signs of regression yet. And, I think it could be added for a decent price to shore up the secondary and kind of alleviate any concerns of the Owens and Thomas competition for one of your starting safety spots. So, that rounds out the Indianapolis Colts and kind of where they're at and where I think they should go or who I think they should target. So moving on to our third team in the South, we got the Jacksonville Jaguars. Had a somewhat promising 2025, brought in the new coach, young GM from the Rams, made splashes, but fizzled out in the long run. Surprisingly, they were not very active, as you can see here. The biggest additions are really the only 2 that they had, and that was re-signing cornerback Marterick Brown and signing Chris Rodriguez Jr. from the Commanders to pair him with Tootin. Departures as well, didn't really have anything too crazy, but they did, lose some important pieces in ETN and Devin Lloyd to free agency, otherwise released Johnny Munt, who some of you out there may be saying, who is that? Exactly. But, losing ETN and Lloyd certainly hampers this team. Overall, I think just looking at what they've done through the first wave, it's very obvious that the Jags are going heavy on the draft to fulfill their needs. And I can't blame them. They have 11 picks in this draft, no first rounder, but, 4 picks in the top 100. So they can certainly influx the youth pretty quickly with just using their picks. I think just looking at what they've done from their signings, they obviously shored up the outside corners by re-signing Brown and, making Travis Hunter a sole cornerback, which we knew would happen, but, often early, never wrong, as we like to say. And I think Rodriguez, certainly helps bring some pressure off of the loss of ETN to the running back room, but, also flip side, I think puts a lot of pressure on second-year running back Tootin to, make a big step forward in 2026, which hopefully he does for fantasy purposes, but still, I mean, a lot of pressure. But yeah, so that's the additions and retentions for the Jags. Looking at what I think are the top three remaining positions of need. Number one, I think, is defensive tackle. They just kind of like their counterpart in the Texans, need to improve the run defense and I think provide rotational young depth behind their veterans in Eric Armstead and Hamilton. They need to also look at adding an edge rusher or D end, definitely not a glaring need because they have invested a lot of money in edge rusher specifically, but they also, I think, need more rotational help and just depth behind Josh Hines Allen and Travon Walker. And then finally, with the loss of Devin Lloyd, I think they need to look at adding a linebacker to have that running mate with Alokun, because I mean Alokun and Lloyd were the center of this Jags offense for defense, for the last 4 years. So really, I mean, they have a need for a starting caliber linebacker to fill the gaps in the middle of that defense and be that running mate. So, with those positions of need in mind, what do I think are the best additions through the free agency or the draft? I mean, at this point, I think it's safe to call a spade and say that like I said, the Jags are fulfilling the remaining needs all through the draft. So looking at the picks they have, and again, they don't have a first. Thanks for trading up for Travis Hunter, but they will be picking in the second round to start things off. So I think the first guy they got to target is Christian Miller, the D tackle out of Georgia. Just like a strong fit for what I said they need. And that's, to improve their run defense and get a versatile run stuffer, to play in the middle of that, be the cog in the middle of the machine in the interior D line. I think taking him and targeting him at number 56 immediately boosts, their ability to apply interior pressure and would be a quality rotational piece and, guy to learn from those veterans I mentioned in Armstead and Hamilton. Looking later in the draft, I look at a guy like Zion Young, the D end from MIZ, baby Mizzou. A solid mid-round pick, in my opinion. Very productive career at Mizzou. Mizzou produces a lot of quality NFL edge rushers. I mean, the proof's in the pudding. Just Google it sometime if you want. But he, just looking at what he brings, he has ample athleticism to match with his range. From the edge rushing perspective, and I think just again provides quality depth and the edge pass rush versatility that they need behind Hines Allen and Walker. Jeez. And then finally, looking at kind of their third round day 3 pick, I look at a guy like Kayshawn Elliott, a linebacker out of Arizona State, or Az State, as I like to call it. But, just watching the film, he plays a lot like Devin Lloyd, kind of that, uber athletic linebacker that provides, blitzing capabilities, has the athleticism to match in coverage and against the run, and, can, provide range in the middle of the defense. So I think that's a guy that, in that third round could provide a rotational role early and then eventually, be that guy to take over for Alokun when they move on. But, that's kind of where I see the Jags going in this draft, or where I think they should go. Jags fans, if you're out there, I mean, be sure to let me know how you feel about these guys I'm targeting, if you agree with them or disagree with what I think the remaining needs are. But that wraps up our little tour in Duval, of all places. So to finish things off, we got the final AFC South team. That is the Tennessee Titans, with a revamped coaching staff, promising young quarterback, and a team that spent a whole lot of cheddar in this first wave of free agency. You see the signings there. Got Wan'Dale Robinson, D lineman John Franklin Myers, a flurry of cornerbacks with Flott, Alante Taylor, Joshua Williams. They signed Daniel Bellinger, Jacob Martin, Austin Schlottman, Jordan Elliott. They traded for Solomon Thomas. I think I got a little conspiracy that Robert Saleh cannot go anywhere unless Solomon Thomas is a guy he's coaching. Signed Tony Adams, signed Mitch Trubisky, got Tommy Townsend, the punter, big departures. They released L'Jarius Sneed, they released Xavier Woods, and released Lloyd Cushenberry, all players that they spent some money on to, try to build this the first time. I think the biggest signings have to be, John Franklin Myers, Wandell Robinson, and Alante Taylor. The biggest departures, in my opinion, undoubtedly are Sneed and Cushenberry. They also did lose Chig Okonkwo in free agency, but just overall, I think this is a very solid free agency period for the Titans team that, quite frankly, had a lot of needs. They brought in, immediate impact players on both sides of the ball with Franklin Myers and Wandell. And, like I said, retooled their secondary with the barrage of cornerbacks. And, got a lot of guys that have familiarity with either Dayball or Sala or both, as well as, the new members of the staff that came in with those guys. And I think that's, something to be said, and getting guys that know your system and understand what wants to be implemented to help, expedite the rebuild and establishing of a culture, if you will. So, a lot of smart moves were made by Sala and Dayball. It seems like the guys are working in tandem to, right the ship in Tennessee. And I think, you got to be excited about the moves that were made. Like, they didn't just throw money at people to throw money at people. I think they made educated signings to, get what they think needs to be done. And that's really all you can ask for as a fan, for, what your team does. But with that being said, there is still work to be done. You don't pick number 4 in the draft for a reason and, solve all your problems by writing a few checks the first wave of free agency. So, what do I think are the top 3 remaining needs for the Titans? Obviously, they still have, interior O-line issues. I mean, they are opening, they have openings for a starting center and right guard right now. They got Schlottman, who played with Dayball in New York, but, he's going to be 31 soon and has never played more than 400 snaps in a season. They're starting right guard this last season, and Kevin Zeitler, shout out Zeitler. He's still a pending free agent, so still some questions there. I think running back is an under the radar need, because people say, well, they got Pollard and Spears, and I'm like, yeah, but what did those guys do to improve Cam Ward, if you will? So I think they need to get a bona fide running mate to just help Cam Ward and, take pressure off of the developing quarterback. And then, like the rest of the teams in the South, they need linebacker and edge help. I mean, Tennessee is moving to a 3-4 defense, so they're going to need an influx of guys that can play, kind of both in coverage and off the edge. They added Jeremiah Johnson via trade, but really otherwise, don't have much there in terms of, reliable or proven commodities. So undoubtedly need to add some players in there. Looking at what I think are the best remaining moves, or ideal moves, I think with the Titans, I went with a little hybrid approach with a couple draft selections as well as a free agency signing. Looking at their draft, they got 9 picks, obviously have pick number 4, and then, picks through every round with 2 fifth rounders and 2 sixth round picks. Number 1 need, and the guy that I think they're going with at number 4, is Jeremiah Love, the running back out of Notre Dame. I mean, I just think at this point, it is no doubt that they are picking Love, and I love the idea of, them pairing an elite running back with all the tools with the young and developing Cam Ward. Just looking at someone like Jeremiah Love, he has it all, quite literally: vision, contact balance, speed. Ran an insane 40 at the combine, and, the pass down ability out of the backfield. So again, I think that's just a perfect piece to, take some pressure off of Cam Ward and really help this offense grow fully. And, I think just given moves some other teams have made, it's pretty apparent that Love is going to Tennessee at this point. So Titans, get your jersey orders in now, I guess. Another guy I think that they can pick, in round 2, I'm looking at Cassius Howell, the edge rusher out of Texas A&M. If they don't go Jeremiah Love at number 4, they're taking an edge rusher. So if they're taking Jeremiah Love, like I'm saying they are, then they obviously have to take edge rusher at pick 35 in the second round. Looking at a guy like Howell, he has a bit of that Reuben Bain narrative to him with the historical deficiencies in arm length. But, looking at what he did at the combine as well as just watching his damn film. I mean, you can see that he has freakish speed and athleticism to counterbalance some of those length issues. I mean, he ran a 4.59 40 at the combine and posted 11 and a half sacks at Texas A&M in the SEC last season. So I think the guy understands how to get to the quarterback and be productive against elite talent. But hey, whatever. And then final move I think would be an ideal fit for the Titans given their needs. That would be signing another former New York Giant to come into the fold, but that would be Bobby Okereke, the linebacker from the Giants, pending free agent. Like I said, obviously previously played for Dayball, as well as the new linebacker coach and D coordinator that they brought in. And I think just brings you that quality experience to the middle of the defense to help, shore up a glaring need and just, build that culture that Saul is undoubtedly trying to implement in Tennessee. A lot of people have said that this signing is inevitably happening. I think they're just waiting for the price point to get right at this point. But I think that's an ideal free agency move that could still be made for a team that's, spend a lot of money. But that wraps up our AFC South review of the waves of free agency and remaining needs. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, please like the video. If you're a fan of one of these teams or just a fan of the offseason and the grind in general, please comment below. We want to hear your thoughts and just talk ball with y'all. As always, if you are looking for more content, please subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. Please be on the lookout or look up our Patreon that we just recently launched, dropping exclusive content on every NFL team, as well as, some insider content, more team specific stuff, as well as our Hit Squad Unfiltered. So definitely want to check that out. If you want to get at me or any of the fellow Hit Squad members, there's our stuff on social. If you're looking for more lockdown defense content, there's all our social media information. But that wraps up this AFC South review. Please be on the lookout for the rest of our coverage this week, hitting the AFC West and East. Otherwise, please continue following and be on the lookout for more offseason coverage from the Hit Squad. In the meantime, in between time, I'm the Real AG. We'll catch y'all later.